Thanks for clicking on this video. Be sure to hit the notification bell if you are a new or returning subscriber to keep up to date with all of this channel's latest releases as we are transitioning to global coverage and expand by hiring a production staff. Be sure to leave a comment of your thoughts of this video down below and join our Discord server if you have any questions or want to further discuss this topic. Links are down in the description. So the last time I covered France24 was back in 2016 regarding their Zaitseva report in separatist-held Donetsk. The report we'll be going through today was written by the same France24 author, Elena Volochine, which is where myself, as well as the help of a Donetsk People's Republic press journalist that was on scene together with Miss Elena of France24, exposed her misinformation, and France24 resorting to fakery for their story. Nobody from France24 responded to my requests for comments. As usual, we will be playing the report and then discussing key points of it and present counter-arguments to Miss Elena's report.
A special train pulls into Sevastopol, where the annexation of Crimea started, bearing trophies from another war.
On this vehicle, you can see an 82mm anti-tank rocket launcher. It was seized in January 2017 during the liberation of Aleppo.
All the items on display were taken in Syria from members of illicit armed organizations. In total, this convoy will cover more than 28,000 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok.
This is a propaganda operation organized by the Russian Defense Ministry.
How is this a propaganda operation organized by the Defense Ministry? The Russian Ministry of Defense has been putting on display captured ISIS and moderate opposition's weapons from Syria since Russia's Army 2016 Military Expo, which is held annually and is attended by foreign delegates from over 50 countries. Showing trophies, as they are called, alone isn't harmful nor a subject of propaganda. It's in a way modern history, with each hardware having a story behind it and usually gets sent to museums after their public tours for military expos. Many countries do the same thing from their conflicts, with one example being Ukraine showing captured separatist, or in some cases claimed, Russian military hardware in Kiev's public display, not far from a Donbass war museum. But let's continue and listen to what France24 has to say next.
Its message that the Russian army is helping the Syrian army to fight Western armed terrorists.
That's not an inaccurate statement. A lot of the moderate opposition, or the falsely labeled, quote, Free Syrian Army, is actually comprised of dozens of independent, many fundamentalist groups considered to be terrorists even on the US State Department's watchdog list, and many of these groups used to constantly change and relabel their names for legal purposes to continue receiving US coalition lethal aid. At one point, the Free Syrian Army, FSA, had to change its name to the, quote, New Free Syrian Army, and the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Nusra Front renamed itself as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, and more recently again renamed themselves as Tahrir al-Sham. At one point in 2006, the US State Department acknowledged that despite tracking attempts on their TOW ATGM missile supply drops to the moderate opposition would end up in the hands of groups that the US-backed SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, as well as Russia, were fighting, such as the Turkish-backed terrorist group Ahrar al-Sham. In short, distribution of these weapons was not organized in a professional manner, and many guaranteed deals weren't honored by majority of the FSA groups.
This is a mechanical deminer. Great Britain exports them to other NATO countries. I stress NATO countries.
But just as it was with the annexation of Crimea, the Russian army wants to hide the true nature of its Syrian operations.
You mustn't say the Russian army is fighting on the ground. The Russian military over there, it's just the Air Force, full stop. And that we're bringing
friendly assistance and humanitarian aid, right?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it. So you don't mention the joint operations.
I've caught France24 pre-recording conversations and applying them into completely different reports for completely different conversations, such as when France24 claimed they heard a DPR commander saying in front of Western journalists that they were, quote, going to dress up separatists as Ukrainians and shoot at themselves to show violation of the ceasefire from the Ukrainian side. This was debunked by me and Christelle Niant, which was on the scene and commented on the incident. I've also caught France24 using mistranslations for their reports. This is called yellow journalism, to make a story more exciting by stretching the truth with misinformation, or, to say it bluntly, make it as fake as a reality show. In this case, I wish we could hear the actual conversation with subtitles, because Russia has never denied having boots on the ground in Syria. On the contrary, Russia praised its Spetsnaz troops and military police numerous times for their on-the-ground battles against ISIS, as well as providing security in a multitude of sectors. They also have advisors and sappers on the ground to demine cities that were minefielded by retreating ISIS and other terrorist groups, as well as humanitarian convoys and corridors. Bottom line is that I have never heard from the Russian government of them claiming that they stick to only air support role. In fact, only a handful of medias now, such as CNN, deny the fact that Russia has had a role in defeating ISIS throughout most of Syria, whereas this map difference on screen now shows liberated ISIS-held regions in which operations were mostly jointly conducted between the Syrian Arab Army, SAA, and Russia.
Yet in Sevastopol, Russia's military maneuvers are anything but discreet.
Because in the case of this report's allegations, they're not aiming for discretion.
The warships docked here are a tourist attraction. You can even take a boat trip to get a closer look.
I can do the same thing at Staten Island's Fleet Week. The crime is that New Yorkers get it only once a year during the summer, while Putin allows it year-round.
This ship is used to transport rockets and torpedoes. It's fair to say it is unique.
Before the annexation, the fleet was aging and out of use.
I'm not denying that Russia modernized its Black Sea fleet since they took Crimea, but I wouldn't call the Russian fleet in specific as aging before the annexation. The Black Sea Fleet was used in 2008 during the South Ossetia War, also known as the Russo-Georgia Five-Day War of 2008. The fleet entered into a Georgian port city of Gori and even conducted successful operations there. The Ukrainian ships, on the other hand, that Russia captured during the annexation of Crimea have not aged well at all, and all 70-plus ships that Russia captured were given back to Ukraine by Russia by 2015.
But since then, a transformation has taken place, before the tour guide's very eyes.
In front of us there is a submarine of type 636.3. It's a fleet that was armed 2 years ago. Everything we see in this bay is weaponry that appeared over the past 5 years.
There are new submarines and frigates equipped with cruise missiles. Russia says it needs to defend the Crimean Peninsula from a potential attack by NATO. But that's not the only reason it has brought the big guns here.
From the Russian perspective, both government and majority of civilian, especially the average Crimean perspective, they see the issue of a possible NATO attack as a real possibility, just as some European countries see a Russian attack on them as a possibility. In this case, the quote, big guns are brought out in large part due to a balance of power between Russia and NATO over the Black Sea. The US uses a very active NATO port in Romania that is used for NATO maritime and military exercises, with Ukraine and dozens of other nations participating in them, such as the annual Trident Juncture exercise, and even weekly aircraft interception of both sides. The USS Donald Cook is an example of one of the ships that is usually at the Romanian port. US ships with the Aegis system, considered to be one of the most advanced naval systems by the West. The only fair comparison that I can mention is to remember the anxiety the US felt during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how prior to the crisis, the US felt uneasy with a Soviet presence near the US border.
A year and a half after the annexation, the Kremlin started operations in Syria.
In the beginning, supplies for our armies in Syria were organized from right here in Sevastopol. Whoever controls Sevastopol controls Crimea, and whoever controls Crimea controls the whole Black Sea basin.
To be fair, let's assume that Euromaidan has never happened and Viktor Yanukovych was never ousted by protesters. The Sevastopol lease was extended between Russia and Ukraine for 44 years. So whether Crimea would have been annexed or not, the Russians would have still been using Crimea as a base of operations for Syrian missions and trade.
Sevastopol is strategically placed in the middle of the Black Sea.
That's because it's not just a port, it's all city of Crimea, as it has been for a long time.
It is one of two ports, along with Novorossiysk, used to connect Russia with its military base in Syria at Tartus.
Yes, but they don't seem to show the route between Novosibirsk and Tartus, considering that since Russia is a landlocked country for the most part, regardless of whether through Crimea or Rostov, Russian ships still have to pass through the Turkish Bosphorus Strait, and Poroshenko's attempts in 2015 during talks with the Turkish President Erdogan about restricting access to Russian ships through the strait didn't work out well. Also, at the moment as of 2019 and the making of this video, those 3 naval facilities are literally the only 3 that Russia currently owns, as well as a small naval resupply facility in Vietnam called the Cam Ranh Base, and still have to notify Vietnam in advance of any prior visits or rearmament.
And it is thanks to Russian support that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is winning the war over there.
I find it funny that within the same time frame, France24 released a report where they basically recognized the defeat of the US coalition and France's role in the Syrian war against Assad, and are trying to appear publicly that France is attempting its best efforts into a diplomatic solution with Syria and restart a new relationship between the two countries. Their 2 reports in conjunction contradict each other a little bit.
The plan is now entering its next phase. The provinces of Sevastopol and Tartus have just signed an economic cooperation agreement worked out by the respective political parties of Assad and Vladimir Putin.
That was our meeting with the Syrian president in early January this year. It was just after Sevastopol and Tartus signed the agreement on economic and social cooperation.
Dmitry Sablin first went to Syria in January 2014, less than 2 months before the annexation of Crimea, in which he was also an active participant.
Let's be honest here. It's not like the West, in this case, is going to provide reparation assistance to the Syrian government. I mean, look at Libya today after 2011's NATO's bombardment. It started a civil war and split Libya into 2, which is still in chaos till this day. We came, we bombed, we left after recognizing a new official government. It's not like these economic, social, and cultural deals between Syria and Russia is a threat in any way to the global trade system.
The Syrian president has always said that it was very important that Russian companies should get as many privileges and opportunities as possible in Syria, because it's Russia that helped Syria win the war against terrorism and evil, and it's also a way to break the blockade.
International sanctions imposed since the annexation mean that Sevastopol's commercial port is working at just 15% of capacity.
I'm not entirely sure that sanctions is the major reason for this. Going back to the landlocked issue of Russia, the country delivers goods mainly through a railway system, which stretches throughout Asia and into Europe. There's also commercial ports on the eastern side of Russia. And speaking realistically, If sanctions are the reason for low commercial activity on the Crimean port, then it would be smart for any country in this situation to increase its naval trade routes and partners. Nobody in this situation, government or corporate, would act any differently for their self-interest.
The local authorities are pinning their hopes on trade with Syria.
Before, laminated metal from southern Ukraine made up nearly 70% of the goods that passed through the port. Today, obviously, those flows have been cut. Our cereals, though, are very much in demand.
But before cereal deliveries to Syria can start, there's a problem. A local dispute means Sevastopol's brand new cereals terminal has been shuttered for 2 years. Its owner says the governor wants to bankrupt it.
The problem is not the sanctions. It's the governor's policies and corruption that are killing us. Dealing with the sanctions and the conditions imposed by the Port Authority at the same time is impossible.
I thought France24 just wanted me to believe that it was due to the sanctions. Now the blame is being shifted to a local dispute? Why was only one sentence of this spokeswoman shown for this report if the situation is so dire as they make it sound like? As I usually hypothesize, most of the interview didn't say what France24 wanted to hear and publicize, so they salvaged as much as they could, which in this case was one sentence. This is compared to the next guy that gets an entire walk and birds watching scene.
In January, Sevastopol's public accounts controller also accused the city's authorities of trying to bankrupt the port and then sell it off. Dmitry Sablin has been tasked with bringing the local branch of United Russia to heel before the next elections. Moscow follows local disputes in Sevastopol very closely. The city's geopolitical significance is too great to be subordinated to petty personal ambitions.
So the ending made it sound like the report shifted its focus from Russian propaganda to individualized company embezzlement that may jeopardize Russian trade with Syria. I think that since this report was made in conjunction with the pretty much surrendering report for Syria, that the editors of France24 didn't know how to make their own propaganda video or what they should and should not show that was reported by Miss Elena Volochine. In the end, we didn't get any information about who exactly wants to sell it, what they want to build in replacement there, and instead, France24 just mashes up as much as they could that the report itself can't even tell if it's for or against Russian bilateral trade with Syria. If you made it until the end of the video, thanks for watching. I am currently in the midst of hiring a full-time production team as well as reaching out to insiders globally. If you like what I'm producing and would like to see more frequent and in-depth content, please consider donating on my Patreon or PayPal. Even $1 can go a long way to helping us fund this, and you'll receive some insider perks as well. And I don't mean just channel insider perks. I mean information and footages given to me by my insiders from war-torn areas. Thank you for your support.